Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're diving into something that can really make or break your experience with English.
Oh, absolutely. Mastering English goes way beyond just textbook knowledge, right?
Exactly. It's about navigating the culture and the nuances of communication. And today's deep dive focuses on a word that's deceptively simple, but can be oh so tricky to wield.
Are we talking about the power of no?
You got it. We've got a fantastic article here that really breaks down why saying no could be such a challenge. For me, I used to tie myself in knots trying to be polite, especially when I was first getting comfortable with English.
Oh, I can totally relate to that. You want to make a good impression, but sometimes you end up overcommitting or just not expressing yourself clearly.
Exactly. And I learned that the hard way, let me tell you. I remember this one time back when I was interning in London, my supervisor asked if I could take on this extra project.
Oh boy, here we go.
Right. And I was already swamped. But I didn't want to seem incapable or like I wasn't a team player, so I just blurted out yes before I could even think it through.
Oof, I've been there. So what happened?
Well, let's just say I pulled a few all-nighters, and the quality of my work definitely suffered.
Oh,
It was a real wake-up call about the importance of setting boundaries, even in a professional setting.
that's such a classic example of how the fear of saying no can backfire. And what's fascinating is that the article digs into the psychology behind this fear. It talks about this deep-seated need to belong, to be accepted and liked.
Yeah, and it even connects that to our evolutionary history, saying that for our ancestors, being ostracized from the group could have been a real threat to their survival.
Right, like being part of a tribe was crucial for protection, finding food, all of that. So it makes sense that we've evolved to be so sensitive to social rejection.
There's this primal instinct that's still wired into us.
Exactly. And the article also points out how cultural norms play a huge role too. Like in some cultures, directness is highly valued, while in others saying no directly can be seen as rude or confrontational.
Absolutely. I mean, the article even mentioned that depending on where you are in the world, there are all sorts of indirect ways to say no without actually saying the word.
Right. And for English learners, that adds a whole other layer of complexity. You're not just trying to learn the language, you're trying to decipher these unwritten rules about communication.
It's like there's this whole hidden code you have to crack. And it makes you realize that mastering English is about so much more than just grammar and vocabulary. It's about understanding the culture, the context, the subtle cues.
Couldn't agree more. And speaking of cultural differences, I've noticed that in some cultures, there's a much stronger emphasis on harmony and avoiding conflict.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So
Yeah.
saying no can feel like you're disrupting that harmony, like you're creating tension or potentially damaging the relationship.
Precisely. And that can be a really tough hurdle to overcome, especially for those who come from cultures where indirect communication is the norm.
It's so true. Okay, so we've talked about why saying no is so hard. But the article also dives into the consequences of always saying yes. And let me tell you, it's not a pretty picture.
Yeah, it paints a pretty bleak picture, doesn't it? We're talking about burnout, loss of focus, resentment, basically a one-way ticket to misery town.
Exactly. And what's even scarier is that these consequences can ripple out into other areas of our lives. It's not just about our own well-being. It can impact our work, our relationships, everything.
Absolutely, and there's a growing body of research that backs this up. Like chronic overwork and the inability to say no have been linked to decreased productivity, lower quality output, even increased errors.
Wow, I had no idea it could be that serious.
Oh, it definitely can. It's like constantly running on fumes. Eventually, you're going to hit a wall. And the article really drives this point home. Saying yes all the time isn't doing anyone any favors. It's not good for you, and it's not good for the people you're trying to help.
It's so true. It's like we're so focused on pleasing others that we end up neglecting our own needs. And in the long run, that can actually hurt the relationships we're trying so hard to protect.
Exactly. And that's where the article's discussion of the benefits of saying no becomes so important. It's not just about avoiding negative consequences, but about opening ourselves up to a whole world of positive outcomes.
Like what kind of positive outcomes? I'm intrigued.
Well, their article highlights things like protecting your energy, improving your focus, and even strengthening your relationships. It even talks about increased self-worth, which I think is so powerful.
That is powerful because when we say yes to everything, it's like we're saying no to ourselves, right?
Exactly. It's like we're putting everyone else's needs before our own. And that can really take a toll on our self-esteem and our sense of identity.
It's like we're constantly giving away pieces of ourselves until there's nothing left.
That's such a powerful way to put it. And that's why learning to say no is so crucial for our overall well-being. It's about reclaiming our time, our energy, and our sense of self. It's about setting boundaries and honoring our own needs and priorities.
It's like giving ourselves permission to put ourselves first sometimes.
Exactly. And it's not selfish. It's about self-care, because when we take care of ourselves, we're better equipped to show up for others in a more authentic and meaningful way.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
It's like you can't pour from an empty cup.
Mm.
So by saying no to the things that drain us, we're actually saying yes to the things that truly matter. We're creating space for the people, the activities, the experiences that bring us joy and fulfillment, and that ripples out into all areas of our lives.
Absolutely. It's about creating a life that's aligned with our values, our goals, and our true selves. And that's a powerful thing. It's not about closing yourself off, right? It's more about being intentional with your yeses.
That's a great way to put it. But I gotta admit, even when I know all the benefits, actually saying no can still feel so daunting. Like, where do you even start?
Well, the article has some really practical advice, and what I love is that it takes into account all those cultural nuances we were discussing earlier. Like, it really emphasizes being direct but polite, finding that sweet spot.
Oh, that reminds me of this time I was living in the States, and I got invited to a Super Bowl party. I had no clue about American football, but I really didn't want to offend anyone, so I tried to politely decline. I said something super vague like, "Oh, I'm not sure if I can make it."
The classic non-committal response. And I bet in some cultures that would have been perfectly acceptable, maybe even preferred.
Right. But looking back, I realize it probably came across as wishy-washy.
Yeah, in a lot of English-speaking contexts, especially in the U.S., direct communication is really valued. So a clearer response might have been something like, "Thanks for the invite, but I'm not really into football. Maybe we could catch up another time."
I see. So it's about finding that balance between honesty and respect.
Exactly. You're being truthful about your feelings, but you're also acknowledging the other person's effort. And the article also talks about the importance of setting clear boundaries.
Oh, yeah. Boundaries. Those are essential. Like, how do you actually put those into practice?
So let's say you're asked to take on a task, but you're already swamped. You could say something like, "I really appreciate you thinking of me for this, but my schedule's pretty full right now." You could even add, "I'd be happy to help with something else in the future, though."
Ooh, I like that. It's firm, but it also leaves the door open for collaboration down the line. It's not a complete shutdown.
Right. And sometimes, you might feel pressured to say yes on the spot, like in a meeting or if someone asks you for a favor out of the blue.
Oh gosh, yes, those situations are the worst. Like your brain just freezes and you blurt out a yes before you even had a chance to process.
That's when the article's tip about delaying your response can be a lifesaver. You can buy yourself some time by saying, "Let me just check my calendar and I'll get back to you."
Oh, that's smart. So you're not saying yes right away, but you're also not saying no outright.
Exactly. It gives you a chance to breathe, think things through, figure out your priorities and how you want to respond. Maybe even practice what you're going to say.
And speaking of practice, the article also recommends actually rehearsing, saying no in different scenarios.
Yeah, I know it sounds a little silly, but role-playing can be surprisingly helpful. You can try out different phrases, experiment with your tone of voice, and get more comfortable with that whole process of setting boundaries.
It's like anything else, right?
Yeah.
The more you practice, the easier it becomes.
Yeah.
And the less scaring it feels. But there's one more hurdle the article talks about that I think a lot of us struggle with, and that's guilt. That feeling of, oh, I should have said yes. How do we overcome that?
That's such a good question. And I think it's important to remember that guilt is often rooted in these irrational beliefs, like that we're responsible for everyone's happiness or that saying no makes us selfish or unkind.
Oh, I've totally been there.
Yeah.
Like, if I say no, they're going to think I'm a terrible person.
It's so easy to fall into that trap, but
Right.
one of the most valuable things the article highlights is that you are not responsible for everyone else's happiness.
It's like a permission slip to prioritize your own well-being.
Right. You have your own needs and priorities, and it's absolutely okay to put those first sometimes.
It's so easy to forget that when you're caught up in the moment, right?
Totally. And the article also makes this great point that people who respect you, they'll understand and appreciate your honesty and your boundaries.
That makes me think about how sometimes setting those boundaries actually strengthens relationships in the long run.
Absolutely. Because it allows for more open and honest communication, right?
Yeah.
And it prevents resentment from building up on either side. Like you said earlier, it's about saying a more authentic yes.
It's amazing how we often frame saying no as this negative thing. But what we've been talking about today really flips that script, doesn't it?
It really does. It's about recognizing the power of no to create positive change for ourselves and for our relationships.
It's about choosing what we want to say yes to,
Right.
making those conscious choices.
Exactly. And speaking of choices, there's something the article touches on that I think is super relevant for our listeners. It suggests that mastering no can actually help you achieve your English learning goals.
Oh, that's interesting. I wouldn't have necessarily made that connection.
It makes sense when you think about it. When you're learning a new language, it's easy to feel overwhelmed with all the opportunities, right? You want to practice, you want to immerse yourself.
Oh, absolutely. I remember when I was first trying to improve my fluency, I felt like I had to say yes to every English conversation that came my way. Even if I was tired or the topic wasn't that interesting to me.
It's like you're afraid to miss out on any chance to practice. But what often happens is that we spread ourselves too thin and end up feeling drained and discouraged. And that can actually hinder our progress.
Yeah, it's like we're trying to do too much at once and we end up not doing anything well, quality over quantity, right?
Exactly. So in the context of language learning, saying no can actually be a way of prioritizing your energy and focus. It's about choosing the activities and interactions that will truly help you grow and develop your skills.
So instead of saying yes to every English conversation, I could be more selective and maybe prioritize one-on-one conversations with a language partner or something.
Exactly. Or maybe you focus on practicing specific skills like listening comprehension or pronunciation. It's about being intentional with your time and energy and making sure you're engaging in activities that align with your goals and your learning style.
That makes so much sense. It's not about shutting down opportunities altogether. It's about being mindful and choosing the ones that will truly benefit you. It's about quality over quantity.
Couldn't agree more. And as you continue on your English learning journey, remember that saying no is a skill that will serve you well in countless ways. It's about setting boundaries, communicating effectively, and honoring your own needs and priorities.
And I think that's a perfect note to end on. Mastering English isn't just about grammar and vocabulary. It's about developing the confidence and the skills to navigate real-life situations, both personal and professional.
Well said. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I'd like to leave our listeners with one final thought. How can saying no empower you to become a more confident and effective communicator? What opportunities can you create by saying no to the things that drain you or distract you from your goals?
Ooh, those are great questions. It's all about finding that balance, right?
Yeah.
Being assertive but respectful, honoring yourself but also being open to new experiences. It's a journey, and I think this deep dive has given us all a lot to think about. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Until next time, keep practicing your English and keep embracing the power of no.
Navigating. Part of speech, verb. Meaning, finding your way through or dealing with something successfully. Example, she had difficulty navigating the complex rules of the new workplace. Nuances. Part of speech, noun. Meaning, subtle differences or variations in meaning, expression, or tone. Example, the actor captured the nuances of the character's emotions beautifully. Deceptively. Part of speech, adverb. Meaning, in a way that gives a false impression or appears different from what it really is. Example, the test seemed deceptively simple, but it was actually very challenging. Wield. Part of speech, verb. Meaning, to handle or use a tool, weapon, or influence effectively. Example, she wielded her authority wisely to resolve the conflict. Swamped. Part of speech, adjective. Meaning, overwhelmed with too many tasks or responsibilities. Example, I've been swamped with work this week and haven't had time to relax. Blurted. Part of speech, verb. Meaning, to say something suddenly and without thinking, often due to excitement or nerves. Example, he accidentally blurted out the surprise during the conversation. Ostracized. Part of speech, verb. Meaning, to exclude someone from a group or community, often as a form of punishment or rejection. Example, she felt ostracized by her classmates after expressing her differing opinion. Decipher. Part of speech. Verb. Meaning, to interpret or make sense of something that is unclear or difficult to understand. Example, she struggled to decipher his handwriting on the note. Cues. Part of speech. Noun. Meaning, signals or hints that help someone understand or respond to a situation. Example, the actor waited for his cues before stepping onto the stage. Resentment. Part of speech. Noun. Meaning, a feeling of anger or bitterness caused by unfair treatment or perceived wrongs. Example, her resentment grew as she saw her efforts go unappreciated.